Your name isn't on the gate code, my daughter-in-law said, flashing a smug little smile like she had just successfully hijacked my entire life. So, I just smiled right back, walked over to the moving truck and told the driver, "Unload everything right here outside the gate. Your name isn't on the gate code. Evelyn." My daughter-in-law, Chloe, said without even bothering to look up from her phone. She was tapping away furiously, treating my entire existence that morning like a minor glitch in her grand plans. We were standing at the driveway of a beautiful new house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Austin, Texas, a house that I had personally financed 70% of using the inheritance from my late husband. My son, Julian, stood there like he always did, mute, staring down at his sneakers, completely unable to look his own mother in the eye. In that exact moment, it hit me like a slap in the face. My generosity over the last few months hadn't been appreciated. It had been taken as total weakness. Chloe had changed the code to the electric security gate the night before, supposedly for security reasons. But the real message couldn't have been clearer. She wanted me to know exactly who was boss, despite my name being on the deed, instead of making a scene, throwing a fit, or crying. I just took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. A strange, calm clarity washed over me, instantly locking down my emotions. Life had taught me that screaming matches never solve anything. Only facts and decisive action matter. Right on cue, the massive moving truck carrying all my lifelong belongings along with the brand new furniture the kids had picked out pulled up to the curb. Two burly movers stepped out, looked at the locked gate, and then looked at me. Totally confused. Chloe smirked, spun on her heel, and marched toward the front door, shouting over her shoulder for the men to wait until she unlocked the house. I walked straight up to the driver instead, pulled out my wallet, and made a call that would flip the entire day upside down. "Drop everything right here on the sidewalk," I told the driver, slipping him a generous tip. The guy glanced over at Chloe, who was already up at the porch, and then back to me, the person whose name was on the contract, and who had paid for the entire move up front in cash. He nodded. No questions asked, and his crew went straight to work. Heavy wooden crates and my cherished antique dressers were carefully lined up on the clean concrete outside the property line. Chloe didn't even notice until the third stack of moving boxes materialized on the sidewalk. She came storming down the driveway, her face flushed with rage, with Julian trailing behind her like a nervous shadow. "What the hell? Evelyn? Why isn't any of this going inside?" she hissed, doing her best to keep her voice down so the new neighbors wouldn't hear. I looked at her calmly, slid my wallet back into my coat pocket, and said evenly, "If my name isn't on the gate code, then my property doesn't belong inside the gate." Julian tried to chime in, stammering that it was all just a big misunderstanding, but I raised a single hand and cut him off instantly. Chloe let out a sharp, nasty laugh, rolling her eyes. She muttered that she didn't care, as long as her new furniture got brought in first. What she didn't realize was that the bill of lading listed me, and only me, as the legal owner of the entire shipment. The movers worked fast, neatly lining up piece after piece along the curb. I watched them in silence, already mapping out my next move. By noon, the Texas sun was beating down on the neighborhood, and Chloe was visibly starting to unravel. She had spent the whole morning inside, literally drawing layouts on the bare walls to show off where her high-end designer furniture was going to go. She'd even bragged to a passing neighbor about how modern and spacious her new home was going to be. But when she stepped back outside, she realized the movers had completely emptied the truck. Everything, including the expensive sofas and tables she had picked out, was sitting on the public sidewalk. The crew foreman walked over to Chloe and politely explained that the actual homeowner's instructions didn't match hers. "I am the mistress of this house," Chloe snapped, completely losing her composure and gesturing wildly at the blocked driveway. The foreman just shook his head and held up the official work order bearing my signature. Chloe's face turned bright red as she whipped around to look at Julian, who was leaning helplessly against the truck's bumper, fascinated by his own shoes. I was sitting comfortably on one of my sturdy plastic crates, sipping hot coffee from a thermos. It was fascinating to watch how fast a house of cards built on arrogance collapses when you simply cut off the cash flow. Chloe stomped over to me, demanding that I tell the men to start carrying the heavy stuff inside. I took one more slow sip of coffee, looked her dead in the eye, and carefully set my thermos down before speaking. "I'm not telling them to do anything." "Chloe," I said calmly, checking my watch. It was exactly 1 o'clock. My contract with the moving company ended the moment they unloaded the cargo at the designated drop point. And right now, that point is outside this gate. The foreman nodded in agreement, had me sign the final release, and climbed into the cab with his crew. The massive truck rumbled down the street, leaving behind a stunned daughter-in-law and a thoroughly overwhelmed son. Stacked on the curb was easily $80,000 worth of furniture and belongings that legally belonged to me. Julian finally took a step forward, his voice shaking. "Mom, come on. You can't do this. It looks like a giant garage sale out here." I stood up, brushed off my coat, and looked at my son, seeing nothing but weakness in his eyes. "You guys wanted total control of the house," I said. "Now you have total control over an empty one." Chloe started shouting that they couldn't possibly move all those heavy pieces by themselves, and that the weather app predicted heavy rain by evening. I knew that. In fact, I had checked the weather forecast very carefully before I even woke up. I walked over to my car, parked down the street, and unlocked the door. Without another word, I got in, started the engine, and cruised slowly past them. In my rearview mirror, I could see Chloe furiously shoving Julian's shoulder while he stood paralyzed in front of a mountain of cardboard boxes. I drove straight downtown to a charming boutique bed and breakfast that I had booked 2 days ago as a precaution. The owner, a lovely woman around my age, gave me a warm welcome and showed me to a bright, quiet room. Turning the key in that lock brought a massive wave of relief. I finally had a space where my privacy was guaranteed. I sat down at the small writing desk, opened my ledger, and began restructuring my finances with absolute precision. The house might have been registered under Julian and Chloe's names for financing purposes, but the actual mortgage payments were pulled directly from my account. I'd also given them a joint authorization on my savings account to pay the contractors and handling fees, with a few clicks on my laptop. I revoked that authorization immediately. I also canceled the pending wire transfer for the upcoming kitchen and bathroom renovations. It was a cold, business-like act of self-defense, completely devoid of malice or emotional drama. My phone was vibrating itself to pieces inside my purse, but I flipped it to silent and shoved it into a drawer. Julian was trying to call me every 2 minutes, and Chloe was flooding my inbox with texts that I deleted without reading. I treated myself to a quiet dinner downstairs and soaked in the silence. The next morning, I plan to revisit the house, but strictly on my own terms. Dear Quiet Revenge family, we want to take a moment to thank every viewer who spends time with our stories. Many of you have shared your thoughts, memories, and personal experiences in the comments, helping create a thoughtful and supportive community. That means a great deal to us. We believe in being transparent. AI tools may assist with some stages of production, but every story is carefully selected, fact-checked where appropriate, edited, reviewed, and finalized by our team. Because our channel is currently not monetized on YouTube, support from viewers helps us continue producing new content. If you would like to help, even the price of a small cup of coffee can make a difference. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/quietrevengeFamily, Ko-fi, https://go-fi.com/thistryfamily, PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/paypalme/kanhuangmin. Thank you for being part of Quiet Revenge. When I drove back to the house at 9 the next morning, it was a pitiful sight. The dark storm clouds hadn't spared them, and a steady, miserable drizzle had already turned the bottom layer of cardboard boxes into mush. Julian and Chloe had clearly spent the entire night dragging the most expensive items into the foyer. Both of them looked utterly exhausted, their clothes stained with dirt, their faces a mix of pure fatigue and resentment. I stepped out of my car, opened a large umbrella, and walked slowly toward the closed gate. Chloe spotted me, sprinted to the intercom, and buzzed the gate open instantly. "Evelyn, you have to help us. The kitchen contractors just canceled because the deposit bounced," she wailed. Julian walked down the driveway to meet me, his hands raw and red from the cold and heavy lifting. I stopped at the very edge of the property line, refusing to take a single step inside, and just looked at them. "The money for the contractors is in my personal account, and that's exactly where it's staying," I said quietly. Chloe stared at me, dumbfounded, as if I had just stolen her birthright. Julian practically begged, "Mom, we had a deal. You were supposed to live here rent-free and help us out." "A deal requires mutual respect, Julian," I replied, pointing my umbrella directly at the newly wiped keypad on the gate. Chloe tried to pivot, attempting a sweet, apologetic tone that sounded so fake it made my skin crawl. "We can change the code to whatever you want." Evelyn. It was seriously just a misunderstanding with the guy who installed the system. She lied through her teeth. I gave her a polite, knowing smile. I knew perfectly well she had changed the code herself via an app on her phone. "This isn't about a gate code anymore. Chloe, this is about who actually owns this property," I stated. I pulled a legal agreement out of my bag, one I had drafted the night before at the B&B. The terms were crystal clear. Either they signed over 70% of the home's equity to me legally, or I was liquidating my capital entirely if I pulled my funds. The bank would immediately call in the loan, forcing the house into foreclosure. Julian read the document, and what little color was left in his face completely vanished. He knew they couldn't afford a single month's payment without my backing. They would lose the house within 60 days. Chloe lunged to grab the paper, but I casually stepped back and tucked it into my purse. "You have exactly 48 hours to get a notary and sign this," I said, my voice deadpan. "If I don't have the signed paperwork by then, I'm transferring the rest of my funds to a completely separate bank." I turned around and walked back to my car, leaving them standing in the rain as the reality of their failed power play finally sank in. The next 2 days were an absolute living hell for Julian and Chloe. Julian later left a rambling, broken message on my voicemail detailing the disaster. Chloe had spent 48 hours straight begging various banks for an emergency bridge loan to cover my share of the equity. But without a high enough household income or solid collateral, every single bank laughed her out the door. To make matters worse, the contractors showed up with a flatbed truck and hauled away the uninstalled kitchen appliances and tools since the initial deposit had been retracted. The house was now a completely unlivable construction zone, crammed with damp boxes, without a working stove, countertops, or heat. Julian called me on the second night, his voice cracking as he openly wept into the phone. He finally confessed to everything Chloe's grand plan had been: to slowly isolate me, shove me into the small basement bedroom, and use me as a glorified, unpaid nanny and maid while they lived like royalty upstairs. I listened to his confession in absolute silence. I didn't feel pity, and I didn't feel a smug sense of triumph. I just felt a cold validation. "I'm so sorry. Mom, we'll sign whatever you want. Please, just save us from this." He begged. I gave him the address of a local title company where I had already set up an emergency appointment for the following morning. Chloe had run out of moves. She had to sign, or lose everything. The atmosphere at the title office was so thick with tension, you could have cut it with a knife. Chloe signed the deed transfer with trembling hands, intentionally looking anywhere but at me. Julian sat next to her like a deflated balloon, scribbling his signature, looking immensely relieved that the crushing pressure was finally off his chest. With those signatures, I officially owned 70% of the house, giving me absolute veto power over every single decision regarding the property after the appointment. We drove over to the house, where the contractors were already unloading their trucks again now that I had authorized the funds. I walked straight up to the gate keypad, punched in a new master code that only I knew, and changed the primary administrator settings on the app. Starting today, things are going to be run differently around here, I told them as they sat on 2 unpacked boxes in the hollow living room. I've decided I'm not going to move in. Instead, I'm renting out the entire top floor to a lovely young couple I met through the B&B. Chloe shot up from her box, her eyes practically popping out of her skull. But that was supposed to be our master suite and walk-in closet. I looked at her with a blank expression. Plans change, Chloe, especially when someone else is footing the bill. Julian just nodded numbly, finally understanding that they were now just tenants living by my grace. 3 months later, I was sitting on the balcony of my brand new luxury apartment in downtown Austin, enjoying a stunning view of the skyline. I had ultimately decided against living in that suburban house. My peace of mind and my independence were worth far too much to compromise. The rental income from the top floor of the house covered my apartment's rent perfectly, allowing me to live a completely stress-free life. Julian comes to visit me by himself every couple of weeks. Our relationship is slowly rebuilding, but this time, it's grounded in a healthy boundary of actual respect. I haven't seen or spoken to Chloe since the day at the title office, which is honestly the healthiest outcome for both of us. She now has to share her living space with my tenants and keep the property immaculate, knowing that I perform quarterly inspections as the majority landlord. I learned a valuable lesson. Through all of this, you don't establish boundaries by screaming or crying. You establish them through swift, quiet, an undeniable action when it matters most. Whenever I look back on moving day, I don't feel an ounce of regret. I just feel incredibly proud of myself. Sometimes, you have to leave everything sitting out on the sidewalk just so people can finally see the true value of what you bring to the table. I took a slow sip of my iced tea, closed my eyes, and let the warm afternoon sun sink into my skin, entirely content in a kingdom of my own making. Dear Quiet Revenge family, we want to take a moment to thank every viewer who spends time with our stories. Many of you have shared your thoughts, memories, and personal experiences in the comments, helping create a thoughtful and supportive community. That means a great deal to us. We believe in being transparent. AI tools may assist with some stages of production, but every story is carefully selected, fact-checked where appropriate, edited, reviewed, and finalized by our team. Because our channel is currently not monetized on YouTube, support from viewers helps us continue producing new content. If you would like to help, even the price of a small cup of coffee can make a difference. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/quiet-revenge-family, Ko-fi https://go-fi.com/history-family, PayPal https://www.paypal.com/paypalme/kanhuangmin. Thank you for being part of Quiet Revenge.